This episode of Beyond Resilience is brought to you by Advancing Justice Atlanta. Asian Americans Advancing Justice Atlanta is the first nonprofit legal advocacy organization dedicated to protecting the civil rights of Asian Americans, Native Hawaiian, Pacific Islander, and Arab, Middle Eastern, Muslim, and South Asian communities in Georgia and the Southeast. Their vision is a social movement in which communities of color are fully empowered, active in civic life, and working together to promote equity, fair treatment, and self-determination for all. Using policy advocacy, organizing and civic engagement, impact litigation, and legal services to defend, protect, and advance the rights of Asian Americans, Pacific Islanders, Native Hawaiians, and other immigrants at all levels of government. Advancing Justice aims to build a community-centered movement to affect long-term shifts in power, behavior, and culture. At the foundation of their work is their commitment to focusing on bottom-up versus top-down solutions. They are inspired by the heart and spirit of our community members. They see community groups not merely as clients, but they're partners in the fight for equity. They are true believers in collaboration and movement building. Human rights is at the core of all of their work. Athena's Warehouse and the community we serve relies on the work of Advancing Justice Atlanta. We rely on their nonpartisan multilingual canvassers and phone makers to notify our community of upcoming elections and important news. We rely on their civic engagement team to teach the youth we serve about how to be upstanding citizens. If you're interested in or in need of the services provided by Advancing Justice Atlanta, or if you'd like to volunteer, you can find their website at advancingjustice-atlanta.org. That's advancingjustice, one word, -atlanta.org, or on Instagram at advancing_justice_ATL. That's advancing_justice_ATL. Thank you so much to Advancing Justice Atlanta for sponsoring this episode of Beyond Resilience. Welcome to Beyond Resilience, where we deep dive into the lives of women, non-binary, transgender, and gender non-conforming people in the metro and greater Atlanta area who exemplify resiliency by bouncing back and becoming greater as we leap beyond resilience. I'm your host, Dia Parker, and this podcast, as always, is brought to you by Athena's Warehouse. Today, we will be interviewing our certified therapists that, as an organization, we've been working with since 2019, Amenah Arman. In 2019, Amenah founded her private, non-traditional therapy practice called Sane in the Membrane. As a leader in narrative exposure therapy, she's helped dozens of people of color and artists cultivate self-acceptance and identify what they need to thrive. Amenah received her MS in clinical mental health counseling and Bachelor of Art in creative writing from Georgia State University. Since 2019, Amenah has provided stellar mental health support services to the youth in our programs, and we're so grateful to have her have worked with our students, especially during the 2020 quarantine when our youth needed her the most. Thank you so much for being here.
Thank you for having me. I'm looking forward to this conversation.
Me too. This is, one of our first interviews, so a slight break in how we've been doing our podcast structure so far. And I'm really glad that we get this opportunity to dive more deeply into the work that you do with our youth and the work that you do in your day-to-day. So tell me more about Sane in the Membrane and what you mean when you say non-traditional therapy and how that might be different from traditional therapy.
Yeah, it's a great question. So when I think traditional therapy, to me, it feels like you're consulting with someone outside of you and you're asking them to be an expert on your lived experience. And I can identify that I'm an expert on trauma, and I've studied the effects of trauma on communities of color, but I still don't consider myself an expert on someone's individual lived experience. And also, when I think traditional, I think Western. And the Western sciences view mental health from an illness perspective. It's more so, let's go ahead and throw some diagnoses. Let's play around with some drugs, see what sticks, right? So it's definitely looking at mental health and wellness from that lens of illness. And so I definitely, yeah, that's why I went the non-traditional route. So when I say non-traditional, in my mind, it translates to you are the expert of your lived experience, and I'm simply an aid. I'm walking alongside you on this path called your life. Thank you for inviting me into it, and supporting you in whatever way you need support. So you dictate what it is you need in therapy instead of me coming in with my degree and my expertise and telling you exactly what type of changes you need to make and, all that Western stuff.
Yeah. And when it comes to, the patient as the expert or the client as the expert, you're really, in my mind, helping folks pull from their toolbox and maybe challenging them and showing them, new ways of coping with whatever's going on with their life. And so that makes me wonder, what motivated you personally to go with this non-traditional approach? Like, what got you into therapy? What made you want to become a certified counselor? And why uh why this way?
Yeah. Yeah, in order to answer that question, I suppose I have to do some self-disclosure here. So in 2014, oh my God, it's wow, almost 10 years. In 2014, my sister was diagnosed with bipolar. And as a family, we were just, oh my God, it felt like a tsunami hit our household. Like we had absolutely, no clue about the mental health world at all. Um, and so as I saw her struggle to understand the diagnosis that she was given, and I saw her cycle through different types of therapies and therapists and groups and medication and psychiatrist appointments and all that, right? Because I was doing this alongside her. We, as a family, we just got together and um, were there to support her in whatever way we could. But throughout all these meetings that she went to and all the therapy that she tried, and there was something that hit a hot spot for me because I realized at that moment that there were just so many different identities that she had that were completely not addressed within the therapy that she was doing, or even like during her, psychiatric appointments. Like to be or to have an Eastern background, because we're Middle Eastern, and then to be raised in a Western society, you are in a state of constant dissonance because what you're taught at home is not what's embraced by the external culture that you're partaking in. So you are in a state of, almost like a consistent bipolar. And it didn't like her diagnosis didn't make sense to me. The way she was handled, like none of it resonated with me. And I knew there was something there for me. And at the time I was working on my creative writing degree, and I had a 2-year-old, and I was gonna do something in the psychology world because I minored in psychology, but I just wasn't sure what it was. And after her diagnosis, I was like, "Oh, man, I think I gotta do it." Like, it was just like a light bulb moment for me. Um, I knew that, at the root of this diagnosis, her traumas weren't addressed. To be othered as a Muslim woman of color, being in a state of consistent macroaggressions, um, I knew that wasn't being addressed. So I thought, okay, you're gonna make a change. You're bothered by this for a reason. And I'm just not that type of person who um, can identify a problem or a place where there's lack, and I don't do anything about it. Like I am the person that will do something about it. At that point, I was, and so I thought, okay, I know what makes sense. Go get your master's in clinical mental health. Like, why not? You're gonna change the field. You know what's needed, right? And I knew that the field was saturated with white women, but it wasn't until I got into the program, which was a cohort of 30 people, that I understood how the field was dominated by white people. And like even being in the program itself, a lot of my identities weren't addressed. And, within that first week, I wanted to drop out because I didn't feel like I belonged there. And I did belong there. I mean, I was there because of, all the stuff my sister went through. So, yeah, so a lot of it is unaddressed, underrepresented identity stuff that got me, to where I am today.
Yeah, wow. I thank you for sharing, about your sister. I couldn't help but notice that you used sort of a music term when you were talking about the way that it feels to be a person of color in our society, that state of constant dissonance. And I remember that, we got connected because we were looking for someone who could do music and art therapy, someone who was a woman of color that could speak to also like the things that our youth face, being children of immigrants or immigrants themselves. And when I found you, I was like, oh yeah, this is the person. We have come to the right place. Because it's impossible to treat, it's impossible to help, it's impossible to be a voice of support and a support system and support structure for someone going through anything when you can't really or you don't take the time to acknowledge them, right? And all
Mhm.
those many different things that make a person a person. So it's really important for us and for our girls that you see them wholly. And so when you're, working with your clients who are majority people of color, majority artists, that ability for that person to cultivate self-acceptance and to understand their own identity better. How do you or what are some of the unique struggles that you've seen in working with this population of people of color, artists, folks who need this non-traditional support?
Mhm, mhm. Yeah. So I'll start with, when I get a referral or I get an email, someone sees my website or they see me on TikTok or whatever. Um, the first, like that first consultation that we have, I always get I saw your picture. Like I can't even tell you how many times I have heard that in consultations. Like it's an instant like door opener for me. Like it's the I never thought it would be, honestly. There is always the response of you look like me. So I feel comfortable even asking for this service. So I'm receiving people who have already gone through being or having a therapeutic relationship in which they didn't feel understood, acknowledged, in which they didn't feel like they could relate to their therapist or their therapist could relate to them. Right. So that's the point that I'm getting them when they've already gone through, maybe a few sessions with another therapist who's not a person of color. Um, and normally, like you said, artists and people of color, when you think of what it takes to create, you have to not be gasping for air, right? Which means you got to be out of survival mode. And being a person of color in the West, you're born with a sense of hypervigilance. You're constantly surveying your environment, making sure, you're code switching effectively, you're appearing properly, making sure every word is said that's said and spoken, it's spoken with a certain type of intentionality. Like we can't get things wrong, basically, right? Um, so we're under a lot of external and internal surveillance. And because of this, there isn't space to imagine. Like there's very little space to create. Um, the struggles that I see with clients, so they come in and they say, I think the thing that I need to fix is I'm lazy. I just know it. I'm lazy. I've been procrastinating and I just can't seem to get it together. And that's like just gasping for air. And then it isn't until we view, right, what's happening from a larger context that they provide themselves with a teeny tiny bit of grace. Technically, you're tired, and rightfully so, because the external world is surveilling you and you're internally surveilling yourself. So for a lot of like my people of color sessions, the sessions are used for them to exhale, like to just, here is a space in which I can breathe. And after there's, that exhale, then they can explore parts of themselves that they couldn't necessarily explore outside of session simply because it's not safe. Rightfully so. That's not an imaginary, unsafe. It's real. And for both identities, that of POC and an artist, they're viewed through the lens of, there's something fundamentally wrong. Like something wrong with me. Help me figure out what's wrong. And what I do in session, which at times can be frustrating for some clients, is I do the opposite. I'm like, I'm going to highlight what's right. I mean, you get enough of that in the external world, telling you what's wrong with you. So I'm not about to, replicate the system here.
Yeah, and I can imagine that that's really eye-opening for folks because, uh, like you said, we are getting constantly bombarded with the message that we're not good enough, that we need to work twice as hard, and it leads to a metaphysical burnout, a burnout of the mind, a burnout of the body, a burnout of the soul and the spirit. And there isn't that give back, that put back in. So I'm envisioning, and I've seen you work with our students, but I'm envisioning that you spend a lot of time, really showing folks how great they are and how much value they're adding to their own lives and how they are agents of their own success. And I just when you were saying earlier, about getting folks out of that survival mode, I wonder if you can speak more about, you know, how exactly you help guide your clients, um, from this place of, who I'm not even breathing, I'm not even exhaling, to, um, a place where they're thriving. Um,
Yeah. I I hate to be the therapist that's like, it depends, but it really does depend on the person individually and where they are. But you know, um, in order to provide safety, there has to be a relationship there, you know. So first, it's working on the relationship, you know, and again, going back to that initial consult, which you know, I guess my ambiguous features work in my favor here. A lot of people identify with me to start out, so they already feel safe, even though they don't know if I'm gonna butcher session or, you know, like what type of therapist I am. But there's already that sense of, okay, she looks like someone I know, maybe a cousin, an auntie, a friend, you know, she looks like someone that is safe, she looks like someone that may not judge me, right? So they have their assumptions about me already set. Um, and I think that that does help in terms of like creating the relationship. So when they enter session, there is like what's the word? On their part, I think unconsciously, there is a sense of this person could be one of my people. So does that make sense?
Absolutely. And in hearing that, that you're using basic relationship building principles to create a safe space that then drives not only change, that the client, you know, came to you wanting in the first place, but change that they didn't know was possible for them, because you can sort of skip that first little half step.
Yeah.
And I that makes me wonder for you what keeps you going. You know, why do you continue to do what you do, and how do you stay safe in creating safe spaces for the folks that you serve?
Mhm, mhm. Oof, that's a question. You're asking me all these personal questions here. Got me processing. Um, yeah, so, how do I? You know, I haven't thought about this in a while. Um, I think it's I made a commitment to making a change at a point in which I didn't even know that whether or not the change would be possible, to be honest with you. Like, it was almost like I was audacious enough to think that with a bachelor's in creative writing, that I suddenly would get into a master's program, then open up private practice, then start to practice on my own, right? Like, it honestly, there's no logic to it. It was I made a commitment when I saw my sister going through this rough time. It was very jarring for us as a family, and I thought, "Damn, I know what's missing here." And I don't I hope it doesn't sound like ego, but it was really, "I know what's missing here,
Mm,
and I am going to provide it for people so that when they go through something like this, they will have someone to process with because I have no one right now. I'm supporting my sister, supporting my mom who's freaking out, supporting my siblings, supporting, you know, but I knew that I had the bandwidth to do it. And it was like in that moment, I think that that's it. Like anytime I do feel like I'm about to like, oh man, that was a lot. That was heavy, you know, because there are sessions that I have that touch on, you know, things that I can't change in the world. Like we are all engaged in a system that is effed up. That's just a fact. I can't change it, you know? And
mhm,
so I'm sitting with people of color at a time of grief, and we're constantly grieving. We're always grieving something, someone, somewhere. Um, so there are moments where I'm just like, "Oh my god," but I think that that commitment is like it's almost like it's stamped in my heart. And I think that's what keeps me, pushing forward unconsciously, to be honest with you.
Yeah, and it's whew, what one personal experience can do and how many lives you will change because of that moment in time. And I think it's really powerful because, you said that it felt egotistical, but it's not. That's one thing that we as women of color don't do enough is
Mhm.
see ourselves as the experts. And when it comes to breaking down systemic issues, and fighting for that change and being that change and having the audacity to create change in the community the way that you have, yeah, it's going to feel weird because we weren't we were never meant for this. This wasn't traditionally in the cards for us. And I just want to take this moment to thank you again for your work with us, going from seeing our girls virtually during the quarantine period, and now coming in person every month and working directly with our youth. And I want to so obviously most of your clients are adults. I'm going to assume like young professionals and artists. And I wanted I remember when we first met, you saying that you wanted to work more with youth, especially young women of color, like the young women that we serve. And I know we've touched on it quite a bit about the issues unique to women of color, but I wanted to give you the opportunity to talk a little bit about why, or how working with Athena's Warehouse has maybe changed your practice, or been a light for you, or just anything that you wanted to say about why you continue to work with us and why you view this youth work as important, as an important part.
Mhm. Yeah, I mean, outside of like, I didn't have a relationship with you to start out. I hardly even knew you, right? Like, I think you reached out to me once, and it was like right after I started Sane in the Membrane, and then COVID hit, or like right before COVID, you reached out to me, and then we didn't do something, but then COVID hit, and then it was virtual. So I want to say, oh, I keep coming back for you, but I didn't know you then. So, but the mission in general, I mean, again, it goes back to, wow, what would it have looked like if my sister got support like that? What would it have looked like for, an organization to come in and basically say, hey, I know that you need extra support because of the family dynamics you have going on at home. And I know that you don't want to ask for it, but we're here. And we're going to continue to show up, even when you give us the silent treatment, even when you act like you don't want to eat, but you helped yourself to two plates, like, so I think that, again, it goes back to like that personal lived experience as a woman of color, um, in America. Like, I love what the organization is about. And I knew that I wanted to do groups, but I knew that I wanted the group work to be meaningful. Like, I didn't want to just do groups just to collect a check. I really didn't. That was never my go-to, even when I first started and I was scrambling to make money. So I think that what really attracted me and what continues to attract me about Athena's is the mission and the way, you know, you guys continue to show up regardless of, whether you're receiving good feedback, regardless of whether it's hard to work with the school system, regardless of, whether you're scrambling for funding or not. Like, there's this relentless nature that Athena has that I can, yeah, deeply resonate with on a personal level. So, if any other organization reached out to me, I they would have to match that, like, relentlessness. I don't know that I would want to, work with, or partner up with, like a mediocre, like, "Oh, here we are, we just show up every Wednesday, we're doing a group." No, there's like a relentlessness to it, and I love it. I am here for it. So thank you for having me.
Yeah, I guess, that really kind of ties back into what we're here to talk about, which is resilience, right? So, because we're in this constant state of gasping for air, we have no choice but to be resilient. And we see it the most with kids, with the youth in our communities, because they are going through so much that you know what I mean, like there's no choice but to
Mhm.
be flexible, be dynamic, and to bounce back, but not just to bounce back, but to bounce back higher. And this lack of lack of support, lack of infrastructure that we need leads women like you to do the work that you do, and it's so necessary. It's so essential, and I'm so glad that we were able to have this conversation. But I really wanted to make sure that we talk about um, therapy in general too, for anyone that maybe they're listening to this conversation because they're scared to see someone, or they are facing so much stigma um, about their mental health outcomes. And I wanted to ask the therapist, wow, what are some of the maybe common misconceptions in the communities of color that you're serving around what therapy is and what it means to take care of yourself, and to put and to get that support.
Yeah. I'll start with I'll talk about my community because, it's a lived experience for me, so but in my community, I speak Arabic, so, the word for, someone who has, like, let's say, is having some mental health concerns, the word is majnoon, which is, like, it translates to crazy, but technically it means, overtaken by a spirit, right? So in my community, there is, the stigma of, "That's for crazy people. You're not Majnun, you're not crazy, you're not overtaken by a spirit. You need to just pray it out. We have God for that." You know, um, and I'm a believer myself, so I do believe that, God has and spirituality has, a beautiful presence in everyone's life. And at the same time, we are in need of sometimes a different type of support. And that can be therapy, or it can be a call with a trusted friend, or it can be checking in with someone at Athena's warehouse. It doesn't necessarily have to be, I have a therapist, right? There are different ways to ask for support from different types of people. Um, And, it's not a sign of weakness, because I know that that's something else that normally communities of color view, therapy as. It's like you're weak. Mama didn't, raise a weakling. And a fear that I've heard like a lot of people in my community express is, therapy is kind of just like another place in which I have to explain myself. And I don't want to do that. I don't wanna have to explain myself. I don't wanna have to explain the fact that there are cultural nuances, right? Um, and that is so valid. It's completely valid. Um, and, Now there's a lot of representation. There's different types of therapists. You have different sites that offer like therapists of color or therapists that have the same faith background. So that can be taken care of now because it seems like there's a lot more representation. So the fears are, they're fading away, right? I am hearing a lot more, people of color, communities of color, being a bit more open to discussing therapy, just simply discussing it, right? So when I was growing up, I didn't grow up with people quoting their therapists. And now that's kind of like the thing. Things my therapist told me or things my therapist says, right? They have that on TikTok or something. Um, and I think that the more representation we have, um, and the more therapists that look like us continue to show up, either on social media or through different organizations or on podcasts or whatever, then I think that is slowly, slowly normalizing um, needing support from a therapist. I think that it's, it will eventually that will eventually catch up.
Once again, I wanted to say thank you so much for joining us today. We here at Athena's Warehouse are really lucky to have access to your services. And yeah, thank you so much.
Oh my God, thank you for having me. This was fun.
This episode of Beyond Resilience is brought to you by Advancing Justice Atlanta. Asian Americans Advancing Justice Atlanta is the first nonprofit legal advocacy organization dedicated to protecting the civil rights of Asian Americans, Native Hawaiian, Pacific Islander and Arab, Middle Eastern, Muslim, and South Asian communities in Georgia and the Southeast. Their vision is a social movement in which communities of color are fully empowered, active in civic life, and working together to promote equity, fair treatment, and self-determination for all. Using policy advocacy, organizing and civic engagement, impact litigation, and legal services to defend, protect, and advance the rights of Asian Americans, Pacific Islanders, Native Hawaiians, and other immigrants at all levels of government. Advancing Justice aims to build a community-centered movement to affect long-term shifts in power, behavior, and culture. At the foundation of their work is their commitment to focusing on bottom-up versus top-down solutions. They are inspired by the heart and spirit of our community members. They see community groups not merely as clients, but they are partners in the fight for equity. They are true believers in collaboration and movement building. Human rights is at the core of all of their work. Athena's Warehouse and the community we serve relies on the work of Advancing Justice Atlanta. We rely on their nonpartisan multilingual canvassers and phone makers to notify our community of upcoming elections and important news. We rely on their civic engagement team to teach the youth we serve about how to be upstanding citizens. If you're interested in or in need of the services provided by Advancing Justice Atlanta, or if you'd like to volunteer, you can find their website at advancingjustice-atlanta.org. That's advancingjustice, one word, -atlanta.org, or on Instagram at advancing_justice_ATL. That's advancing_justice_ATL. Thank you so much to Advancing Justice Atlanta for sponsoring this episode of Beyond Resilience.